How are you doing? This series is called The New Now. I guess the title speaks for itself, doesn't it? We're in the middle of a whole new now, and this new now, my gosh, it's a season. Fortunately, it's temporal. We don't know how long. But it's a season of confusion, for sure, and of a lot of quick changes. It's hard to keep up, isn't it, with all the new developments? But I think above all, we could safely say it's a season of fear. It's a season of fear. That's what I'd like to talk about today, fear itself. You remember FDR's famous speech, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." That's what he said when the country was in another very uncertain time. There's a second part of that quote we don't hear repeated often enough. When he described that fear, he said, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance." That's pretty good. Let's repeat that. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. Yeah, that's the point. When fear paralyzes, when you need to advance and you need to convert tendencies to retreat into advancement, that's the kind of fear to be afraid of, the fear that paralyzes. It's not fear that's the problem, not really. It's the power we're giving it. I mean, David admitted to fear. Psalm 61:2, he admitted, "When my heart is overwhelmed within me." Paul the Apostle told the Galatians, Galatians 4:11, "I am afraid for you." Jesus himself, John 12:22, facing the cross, he said, "My soul is troubled," meaning very disquieted, very disturbed, very distressed at what I'm facing. David and Paul and Jesus were not sinning by feeling fear. But they certainly weren't what we would call fearful. When people are fearful, they not only feel afraid, they let that feeling direct their lives. Now there is the problem. There's the fearfulness Roosevelt was warning us against, and that's the fearfulness which is an affront to God. Now, look, if just feeling afraid is a sin in and of itself, I'm sunk because I feel fear about so many things right now, really. Just like you. There is a lot to rationally fear. And I guess that's the point. There is such a thing as rational fear. I mean, there's righteous fear, the fear of the Lord. Solomon said that's the beginning of wisdom. There's natural fear, right? My car is starting to swerve out of the lane into the other lane. I fear an accident, so I take action. Some guy's walking towards me at night and he reaches into his pocket and pulls out a sharp object. Yeah, my instinctive fear is going to kick in. Nothing wrong with any of that. But then there is what we would call sinful fear. That is when we are allowing the feeling of fear to override faith. Fear overriding faith. Now that equals sin. So how are you and I going to avoid that kind of sinful fear while we're going through this new now? Let me suggest we got to deal with three aspects of it: the influence of fear, the presumptions of fear, and the discomfort of fear. All three. Fear's influence, its presumptions, and its discomfort. First, the influence of fear. One thing that gets my dander up is when people say things like, "Oh, you shouldn't feel that way," or "Oh, don't let it bother you," as if you really have a choice. You know, somebody does something which really offends you, or even somebody physically hits you, and it's kind of unreasonable, even arrogant, to say, "Oh, don't let that bother you. You shouldn't feel anything about it." I prefer saying, "Don't let it influence you." Somebody hurts your feelings, don't let it influence you. I'm not going to say don't let it bother you. It does bother you. Of course it does. But it doesn't have to influence you. It doesn't have to determine what you do or what you say. Now, the same is true with fear. We can feel it. And when we feel it, we can hear its siren call, can't we? I sure do. Fear says, give up on God. He's letting you down. Somewhat like what Job's wife said, just curse God and die. The situation is too overwhelming, too much is happening, nothing's going to change, it's all a mess. Give up on God. Give up on people, they're not worth it. Everybody's letting you down. Give up on responsibilities. That's a common one. I'm frightened, so I just don't want to try anything. I want to flake out. I want to go numb. I want to give up on my responsibilities because there's no point in trying. Now, I can feel fear, okay, but I can't afford to listen to it. Big difference. Much less obey it. So I got to resist the temptation towards the influence of fear. The influence of fear, first thing we got to deal with. It exists, but it does not have to influence us. Then I have to resist the presumption of fear, because fear wants to jump to conclusions. Fear entices me to assume the worst, because at least that's concrete, and I hate anything vague. That's one of the reasons I hate this season we're in right now. Everything is so blasted vague. How long are we going to be quarantined? I don't know. How long are we going to be on lockdown? I don't know. How long will it take to get the vaccine? Nobody knows anything. I mean, it's just very, very vague. So when things are vague, it's very tempting to just default to the worst, because at least that's concrete. Now I can know what to be preparing for. So I just figure everything's going to tank. Aliens are going to land. We're all going to go broke, and I'm going to be put to hard labor writing scripts for Hallmark movies or something. I don't know. I mean, just the worst case scenario. But in that temptation to go with the presumption of fear, I have to remember there is a commandment to honor God. Now look, you and I, we've got the challenge now to honor God in the midst of our fear. Remember, Paul said we walk by faith, not by sight. That is to say, I can accept my lack of knowledge about the situation. I can accept that, but I have a higher knowledge as well. I can exercise my knowledge about God. Please think about that. I can accept my limited knowledge of the situation. This whole thing is fraught with I don't knows. But I can exercise my knowledge about God. That is concrete. What do I know about God? What do I know about Christ? Well, I know Jesus said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. He has promised that. I know that all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purposes. I know that it's promised, my God shall supply all of your needs. You know what else I know? I know my history with God. I know the kind of father he's been. I know the way he's handled my life in the past. So do you. We can remember the mercy of God. We can remember the faithfulness of God. These are all concrete things we can land on. Now, that is not vague. I honor him then by focusing on what is known of him rather than obsessing over what's not known about the situation. Let me repeat this. I honor God by focusing on what is known about him rather than on what is unknown about the situation. That's how I can deal with the presumption of fear. Then finally, I got to deal with the discomfort of fear. Okay? I don't have to let it influence me, that's true. I also don't have to give in to the presumptions I'm inclined to have when I'm afraid. But that still leaves the feeling. And it's not a very pleasant feeling, okay? In fact, it's tormenting. I think part of that is because this wasn't supposed to happen. You know, you go back to the first few chapters of Genesis and you see what God intended. Then you see what Adam and Eve did, and then you see God pronouncing to them what we often call the curse, in which he basically said, okay, because of this, because you've sinned, the human experience is now going to include a lot of things I never intended. You know, you're going to die, you're going to decay, you're going to get old, you're going to have power struggles, the environment's going to get adversarial to you. You are now going to experience things I never meant you to experience. And that means that we deal with a lot of uncertainties, a lot of tragedies, a lot of situations that were really not in the plan at all. And one of those things, that's the torment of fear, because the environment is so often adversarial to our needs. We experience torment. John said that, 1 John 4:18, there's no fear in love because fear has torment. Hey, you know what's interesting? The Greek word for torment John used there is the same one used in Matthew 25:46 when Jesus is talking about the torment of hell, the torment of judgment. That's pretty severe stuff. I got to humble myself at a time like this and admit I am racked with fear, and I can't just relieve myself of that. I can refuse to let it influence me. I can refuse to accept the presumptions I might have with it, but I can't just make the feeling go away. So I have to humbly admit, Lord, I still feel afraid. The fear is tormenting. And so I pray along with David, Psalm 61:2, when my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. Notice he didn't say, when my heart is overwhelmed, forgive me for being overwhelmed, I'm such a wretched sinner. In fact, he admitted his limitations so much, he said, when my heart is overwhelmed, you know what? I don't even think I can walk straight. So lead me to the rock which is higher than I. I'm afraid. Guide me to you and to your peace. Bring me there and then keep me there. Now, we're not talking just vague philosophy here. This is practical truth, more practical than ever. Jesus said, you remember, my peace I give to you. My peace I give to you. Why? Because it's peace based on eternal principles. The peace he gives to me is based on the eternal position I hold with him and the eternal love he has for me. Now, if I switch the channel to a horror movie, I'm going to get scared. If I switch the channel to a Brahms concerto, I'm going to get soothed. The choice of what I focus on is up to me. Then I think I can with integrity say, I may feel fear, but I needn't dwell on it. Let's let you and I keep that in mind during this season, the new now, okay? Okay. It's good talking with you. Thanks for being here. I'll see you on Monday.